I thought it was a great start, but I couldn't hear anything. Okay, now.
Hi, my name is Kristen Arnold. Welcome to our webinar. This is the third of this year's webinars. My name is Kristen Arnold, and I am a high-stakes meeting facilitator. And I am delighted to have you here. And today we are going to be talking about the 3 keys to having a highly effective team. In my experience, there are 3 things that I look at pretty darn closely when I'm working with teams. And the first one is about results. Are you getting the results that you're looking for? Do you know what the results are? The second one is process. Are you using a smooth process to help you get there? And then lastly, do you have the relationships intact? Do you, I'm trying to move this slide. This is a new platform for me, so you're going to have to be a little forgiving of me. Is that do you have these 3 things in place? Do you have good relationships, smooth process, and great results? And all teams operate within constraints. That there is constraints on your time, constraints on your resources, constraints on your capability. And all teams operate with those 3 kinds of things. And when you have an equal balance of a focus on results, a focus on process, and a focus on relationships, then you have what I call the team trifecta. Things are running on all cylinders. And that's great when the team just feels like it's clicking along. And so in this webinar, we're going to take a look at each of these 3 components and ask ourselves, what are some of the things that we can do as leaders to make sure that we're having that focus on results, having a smooth process, and creating collaborative relationships along the way. So we're going to stop at 3 times in this webinar. One is that, yeah, I just was looking at a question coming in saying, I can't hear you, but they're now able to hear me, so that's just good. So in the team, we're able to operate smoothly when you're in balance. But just think about when you're off balance. You're not getting the results. Maybe you're focusing too much on process or not enough on relationships. That's when the team is kind of not working as well. So we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive in each of these. Okay. So let's go to the next slide. Let's focus on results. You know, one of the things that really helps teams is to make sure that you're crystal clear on what the goals are. What is it that you're trying to aim for? And you know, this sounds pretty basic, but it really is a big determinant for team success because you need that alignment for your goals, both what is the short-term outlook, what's the medium-term outlook, and what's the long-term outlook. What are we all trying to do? And then to compound that, when you're looking at alignment, you need to be in alignment, but you also have to have your team in alignment as well as the overall organizational goals. So you really need to make sure that all of those things are in alignment. And this is where you get into that idea about a hidden agenda. You know, personally, I don't think hidden agendas are all that hidden. Most people, they're pretty obvious about what their position is and what they want. And what happens is that you're out of alignment. Either that position that they want is not what the team wants or what the organization wants, or maybe it's a short-term perspective and the team's looking at a longer term. So one of the things that I try to do when I'm working with teams is if you're out of alignment, it's a results issue. It's not a people issue and it's not a process issue. It's about getting crystal clear about what it is that you're trying to do. Now, another tool that you can use that helps teams really get that alignment and get that focus on results is what I call a team charter. And a team charter really helps you get that goal clarity and helps people understand, how do I fit in? What is my role on that team? How much authority do we have? Are we just giving a recommendation, or are we actually being asked to make a decision? And then what happens when we're successful, and what happens when if we're not? And so that document is really, really helpful when teams are coming together. So let's take a look at our listeners on this webinar. One of the things that you might want to do is ask yourself, have I really chartered the team? Have I sat down and talked about what are the goals? How are we measured? How do we know that we're successful? And do we have the right people on the team? Do we have the right authority? Do we have the right capacity, the skills on the team? So you might want to take a look at that. Let's see. I am going to check on questions and answers. So if you have a question, feel free to type it in the chat box on the right-hand side. So just as a little reminder. Okay. The other thing that you can do for a short term, so the charter is for a long-term perspective. But you also need to balance that in alignment with the short term. And that's where it's really helpful to have an agenda. And anybody who's been in Meetings Management 101 knows that you need to have an agenda, because that helps keep you focused on the short term. And that agenda should be in alignment with that long-term charter. And agendas are pretty simple. You've got time. How much time is it going to take? Usually there's some opening stuff. There's some closing stuff. And then somebody has control over each of those items. And that way you can have a plan, and you work the plan. So one of the ways that I can tell a highly effective team is if they have an agenda, number one, and if the presenters, the people who are responsible for specific pieces of the agenda, if it's all the same person, I know that that's a leader-led team. But if it's like all kinds of different people, it's Joe, it's Kristen, it's Sally, it's Pam, it's John, then I know that I have a team. There's a lot of good participation. So make sure that your agenda isn't just one person driven. Another thing that I like to have in order to keep the team focused on what the results are is what I call a team map. Now this is kind of this slide is kind of a Rube Goldberg kind of mechanism, but basically it says first we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, and it kind of lays out the main milestones, the critical things that teams need to be doing. And sometimes they're done in simultaneous, and so this is a linear representation, but it's helpful for the team to know, well, first we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, because what happens is a lot of team members, they want to jump ahead. They want to skip step one and step two, and they want to get to problem solution versus problem identifying the problem. So for example, so for a team where I'm doing process improvement, this is a very basic map. First step is we need to get alignment and focus, make sure that everybody knows what it is that we're trying to do. That's a little bit of me in there. Second step is about understanding the process. Then you locate the pain, then you validate the process, what's actually going on. Is that a pain point, or is there an opportunity in there? And then agree on solutions, and then plan and implement the change, and then we're going to standardize it, then we're going to evaluate it, then we're going to pick up another item. So this way, everybody knows what step we're on. And if you're still in understanding the process and you want to jump to solution, you might be actually creating more problems because you don't understand the process. So you can kind of tell team members, like, hang on, we're going to get there. So a team map, I think, is very, very helpful. Here's another example of a team map. I do a lot of workouts. This is a GE process about bringing all kinds of stakeholders who touch a process in and really work it out, like wring a rag of a water-soaked wet rag, and you want to wring out all the water. That's what a workout session does. It works out all of the inefficiencies in the system. And so there is some key components, and this is a nice map for everybody to see. Here's what we're going to do first. There's a planning piece, then we're going to do some small group idea generation, we're going to develop some recommendations and action plans and owners, and then we're going to report that out in what's called a town meeting where there's open discussion, and then the leaders right then and there do a thumbs up or thumbs down, or maybe you need more information. And then there's the execution phase, which usually takes anywhere from, depending on what the item is, shouldn't take anything more than 3 months. So that is a methodology, and what's nice about having a map is that it gives people that forward understanding about where they are and what results they're expected to do right now. Here's what this critical milestone is. You also are probably familiar with GANTT charts, people who do a lot of project planning. You know, this scares some people, but it's very handy to have, because this is great when things are not as linear and it's a little bit more complex. Or you can just make it very, very simple and do something like the Shewart Cycle, where it says first we're going to plan, then we're going to do, then we're going to check, did we actually do what we said we were going to do, and then take full action. So that's a nice simple diagram as well. So these are some ways that you can make sure that people stay focused on what it is that they're trying to accomplish. But any meeting is not worth its salt unless you end with an action plan, like who's going to do what by when. And if you don't, then you just had a very nice conversation, and your team is probably feeling pretty good, but you aren't going to get any results. Because here's what I think. Teams, when you're meeting together, you don't really do anything. You have great conversations and you agree and you coordinate, but the reality is the doing, the action plan, gets done afterwards. So if you don't have an action plan, nothing's going to get done. And you can tell how robust the team is when you see that who column, who's going to do what. That who, it's got lots of different names. It means that you've got a lot of participation, and it's not just a leader-run group. So at this point, I am going to stop and see what kind of questions that we might have. Okay, so Greg's got one, and he says, let's see, I need to make this bigger so I can read it. Okay, I am going to remove a sticky so I can see this. I can't read it. Isn't that interesting? Oh, there we go. Okay, how have you addressed situations in nonprofit environments when you don't have a paycheck to use to entice, motivate people that act erratically on a team? Well, you know, Greg, I have a lot of experience in volunteers and nonprofits, both on the side of the fence of being a consultant, as well as being a volunteer. Hi there. I can switch screens when we're going into Q&A. And you know, one of the things that that's really helpful for volunteers is that you start with beginning with the end in mind. I love Stephen Covey's book about beginning with the end in mind. You know, it's a timeless tradition. But especially when you're working with nonprofits, is you find out, well, why are you doing this? Why are you contributing your time? What is it that you're hoping to accomplish? And that you find that common ground, the reason why people are there, and you build off of that. So what motivates them is the cause, the purpose, and it might be different than what you think. Especially when I'm doing volunteer work, I always, in fact, I use the term the Team Trifecta. Is that it's got to make sense for me personally. It's got to be something that I think that I can contribute to the organization. And the third one, let's see, me personally contribute to the organization. And for me, it also should contribute to my business, that it somehow, either I learn a new skill that will be helpful to my business, or it will position my business in a better realm. So those are some reasons why I participate. You want to find out from the people that you're working with, why are you participating? What is it that you're hoping to accomplish? And see where that common ground is, so that you're in alignment. Thanks, Greg. I really appreciate that question. Let's see. I've got another one from David. And David said, you mentioned a hidden agenda. What do you do when someone has one? What do you do when somebody has a hidden agenda? And that's a great question, David. Hidden agendas, you know, you would just have to ask. I don't think they're very hidden. I think a lot of people bother hiding them. I think most people are very upfront and forward about what they're trying to accomplish. The question is about alignment. And so sometimes it takes some creative conversations to understand where they're trying to go with their position, so that you see where that common ground is. For example, let's say you're working with somebody and they are bound and determined that they want to build a new parking garage. This actually happened with a client of mine. I had one client who just was bound and determined he wanted a parking garage. Well, that's a position. The end result was what they really needed is to be able to have all the employees have safe and covered parking. Well, when you say it that way, well, now you can brainstorm some other possibilities. A parking garage is certainly one, but it's not the only one. So that would be something that maybe you might think would be a hidden agenda if they're not being explicit in it. But if you ask, you know, so what is it that you're trying to accomplish? Maybe you can raise it into what's the common result that the group is looking for. So I hope that that's helpful. Okay, so let's go into what is the second thing that I look for in a team. So you've got to have good focus on process, but you also need to have a good focus on process. So you've got results and you've got process, and I call all teams go through kind of a GODA process, G-O-D-A. That's not to be confused with Yoda. It's a GODA process. And a GODA process allows everybody to come together and put their fingerprints on the item, whatever you're trying to accomplish. And all teams start out with some kind of generation phase. They're generating ideas, they're generating possibilities, they're generating possible causations, they're generating possible solutions. They're always starting at the point where they're generating a answer to a question. So many of us are familiar with brainstorming, so you want to make sure that there's a creativeness possibility, and try not to play whack-a-mole, you know, where somebody brings up an idea and you go, oh, well, we tried that 5 years ago, isn't going to work now. Oh, somebody else says, well, you know, what about this? And somebody says, oh, well, no, we can't do that because blah, blah, blah. Try to save the evaluation phase for the organization piece, where you take that list, you know, now that you've brainstormed a nice big list, is that you then organize it. And this is the evaluation piece. You organize it by categories, you could organize it by buckets, you could organize it by a flow in a time sequence, you can organize it by a priority. These are the most important, these are the least important, this is the most important. You know, so you're organizing it based on some criteria. So there's lots of different ways that you can evaluate that item so that you can then decide and take action. So that is kind of a meta view of the processes that you use so that everybody can put their hands on the discussion. Now, there are more ideas, specific ideas. I mean, I can't cover them all in a 45-minute webinar, but there are some very specific ideas in the book that I wrote several years ago called Team Basics. And as a gift for being on this webinar, I am going to pick one person's name out of the hat. And that person's name is Tim Davis at the American College, I believe. At least that's what your email looks like. And so you'll get a copy of the Team Basics. So isn't that cool? Well, I think it's very cool. So process, that's a discussion about process. Are there any questions about process? Any questions that you have about process? I'm going to switch the screen now. There you go. So process. I have one from Bob, and Bob says, I agree about having an agenda, but what happens when we don't? That's a very good question. Because an agenda really is a great roadmap. It allows us to know first we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. But I know I've been to a lot of meetings and there isn't an agenda at all. And so I get that, Bob. And here's what I suggest that you do, is that you leap up and you say, you know, we don't have an agenda and we could just have a great conversation, but I'm not exactly sure we're going to get to where we need to go. So I would grab a marker, there's a flip chart, and I would say, so what is it that we need to talk about here? And you'll find that some people will generate a list of what we need to talk about. So maybe there might be 5 items. We need to talk about A, B, C, D, and E. And then you note who brought up each of those items. So then you go back to Bob and you say, Bob, you mentioned that we should talk about A. How long is that going to take? And you say, 5, 10 minutes or something. And you say, great. Now, Bob, would you be willing to lead us on that one? Oh, yeah. And Bob goes, oh, okay. So now you have at least one agenda item, you have a time frame, and you have somebody who's going to lead it. So then you go to the next item and you ask the exact same thing. So you have all of the items, you have a time frame, and you have a presenter identified very quickly, very, very quickly. And then you ask, well, how much time do we have? So you add up all those times, and if you have the time and you're not going to exceed time, then you just move on your agenda. If you have less time than what's been identified needs to be done, well, then you need to prioritize it. And I usually use this by the loudest voice, and I ask, so an A is vital, we must talk about it. A B is it's important, we should talk about it. And a C is to do if we have some extra time. So I just ask, you know, so for item A, is that an A, B, or a C? Loudest voice. And then we start with the A's, we go to the B's, and if we have time, we move to the C's. So I think that's a great question, Bob, and thanks for asking. I have another question from Jerry May. So Jerry May, you asked how specific or detailed should the charter be? Well, you know, I think people can see it. Everybody say hi to Joe. Why not? The more important a team is, the more important it is to the success of the company or the organization, the more formal that team is, the more formal that charter should be. But if it's just a quick team, you might not want to have a real formal charter. But I do think that you need to have the conversation, and that somebody documents what's said in an email, and you send it back to the leader and saying, here's what we heard. We have a month to assemble a team, to put together some ideas and make a recommendation to you about X, Y, and Z. It looks like we'll have a small budget, name the budget, and here's what you think we should be doing and we shouldn't be doing, and who should be on the team. And just write an email. That's enough to be a charter. It doesn't have to be a formal thing. If you look into project management, like the PMBOK, they have a very formal set of standards about what a charter is, and you would do that for a formal project. But my advice is don't make it into a big science project. So there you go. That's my advice. Okay, so let's get back to item number 3. Let's take a look at relationships. So you've got a good solid results. You know what results you're looking for. A solid process, nice and smooth, and relationships. You're looking for collaborative relationships. Now, here's the deal, is that those collaborative relationships don't start right off the bat. If you think about the best team you've ever been on, it's probably started very formal, or you were guarded, or you were shy, maybe intimidated, or there's all kinds of forming kind of feelings. And until you accept that what you're going to be doing is valuable and that you have a valuable contribution to make, you can't get over the first phase of the stages of team development, and this is called the forming phase. Now, I did not create this. This is something that's been around for a very long time. And it's Bruce Tuckman's model about the stages of team development. And as a leader, you can help people get through the forming phase by helping people get to know the other people on the team, helping people to develop the charter. What is it that we're going to do here? So that they can accept that what they're going to be doing is a valuable use of their time. So once you get through that forming phase, you will run into a storming phase. You will run into people going, what? Is management really going to support us? Do we really have a budget? What's this wahoo doing on the team? How come I'm doing, you know, I mean, there's just lots of weird ways that teams go through a storming phase. And what they're really trying to do is assess whether they can trust the members on the team, they can trust management, they can trust that they're going to be successful. And if you don't earn that trust, and trust is earned over time, then, well, you're going to stay in a storming phase. And I don't really worry about getting into this phase because it's normal. Conflict is normal and natural. I don't like heated conflict, but you need to manage that conflict constructively. What concerns me is when people get stuck here, when they get stuck in that storming phase and they can't move into the norming phase, which is where we agree on how we're going to cooperate with each other, that we agree on what is acceptable, not acceptable, so that we can then move into performing the task. And so our relationships, if you notice these first two pieces on forming and storming, we are not working on anything. We are actually working on relationship. We are working on trusting each other. And so it freaks out a lot of people in that when you put people in on a team, the first time that they've ever been there, the productivity increases a little bit, you know, because people are excited. They're like, ooh, this is kind of cool. I'm working on a new project. I'm working with new people. And so they feel good, and you see some productivity. But when you get into the storming phase, here's what happens. Productivity tanks, and people freak out, and they're like, oh my God, I don't like this conflict. And people deal with conflict in different ways. Some people put their head under a rock. Some people are very accommodating. Some people become very vocal and strident. Some people just go into a compromise situation. But what happens is we're not as productive. And so we get freaky, and then we start pulling some really weird behaviors that are more directorial, because especially managers, it's like, oh my God, I need to get us out of what I call the valley of death, because you're trying to agree on new norms about how you're going to work together so that you can perform the task and achieve the result. So there's this like lull of productivity that, you know, you got to work it out. You got to trust each other, and you've got to trust the process that it's going to actually get better. And if you notice on teams that you've worked with other people before, this cycle of forming, storming, norming, and performing, it goes much faster because you've already have those cooperative relationships with people. You've already been through the valley of death, and you know that there's success on the other side because you know and you trust these people. So people are really important. Cooperative relationships. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to love everybody. God knows that's the case. But you do need to to work with them. And so one of the mantras that I always use, and I think that this is a really good mantra, and I've been using it for years, and then I was reading an article about the Pepsi CEO, and she uses this all the time. Her father taught it, so it's not mine. I don't own it, but I've been saying this for a very, very long time, and it's about assuming positive intent. I mean, I think that everybody wants to come into the workplace, into your team, doing the right thing and doing the best possible job as they can. I mean, there's maybe 1% of the population that are just like malicious. They're Machiavellian. I mean, they wake up wanting to make your life miserable. But you know what? For the most part, people aren't. They're not thinking about you. They're thinking about them. They're thinking about how they can contribute, or maybe they're having a rough day and they're not thinking about how they can contribute to the team. Something else is getting in the way. So when I'm dealing with the people on my team, whether I like them personally or not, I assume that they're trying to do the best job that they can. And for some reason, maybe something is in their way. So it's up to you to try to be supportive and help them be in line with what the team is. And one of the tools that you can use are ground rules. And I think that we don't use ground rules nearly as effectively on teams as we should. So ground rules are kind of like the implicit expectations that we have of each other, but we make them explicit. So for example, let's say we as a group, we're not very good about starting on time. So the explicit expectation, or the implicit expectation, the unsaid, is it's okay to come in a couple of minutes late. Well, if that's something that you as a group say, you know, we want to change that, or we want to reinforce a positive behavior, we want to make sure that everybody stays on time, then you might want to put a ground rule that says we start on time and end on time, or we honor our time limits, or you know, something that lends itself to making sure that you start on time. And then you make that explicit. So it takes what's implicit, like everybody should know, but maybe we've got some problems with it, or we're not doing it consistently, and you make it explicit. Now, here's the challenge with ground rules, is that when you're in a forming phase, then ground rules, well, that's self-policing. The team is not developed that bond, that trust, where they can call each other. It just isn't going to happen. So ground rules are effective in the forming phase, but it's more about self-policing. If you want to know how well your team is doing in the norming phase and the performing phase, this is where ground rules really become a team set of ground rules. So that this becomes kind of like the constitution of not the United States, but the constitution of your name the team, where amendments can be made. You make changes. It's a living, breathing kind of document type of thing. But you really use this as a way to help people make the implicit assumptions that we make about our members and make them explicit, so the little things don't drive people crazy. So set those ground rules, and it's a great way of making sure that the relationships start off on the right foot in the forming phase, but also in the norming phase, that the team is now holding each other accountable. I can tell a high-performing team is if the team gives each other feedback, helps them grow. Because, see, here's what happens in a team. You have, this is the Johari window. It was based on some work by Joseph Luth and Harry Ingram, so get it, Joe and Hari, Johari window. And there are things in a team that people know and everybody knows, and that's in the open space. So let's just take me as an example. You know and I know that my name is Kristen Arnold. That's my open space. You also know that Joe, my husband, was roaming behind me. That is stuff that you know and I know. And the great thing about teams and doing team building activities is the more you get to know somebody, the more that open space becomes more open. So this is the reason why you do team building activities, the reason why you do assessments. This is the reason why you get to know each other better. This is the reason why you go do things together, is so that you can get to know each other better and open up that space. But there are some things that you just say, you know, you don't know them and you ain't ever going to know them. So just stay away. This is your hidden area. Now, you know, as you get to know me, I might disclose a little bit more, but there are some things that you are never going to know about me, and that's okay too. You also have something called a blind spot, where you don't know, but the team knows. The team knows. So that blind spot, I'm looking at my slide. I'm not sure that actually, anyway, I'm not going to worry about it. The blind spot is you don't know. I have those mislined. Okay, so I'm going to fix that. Okay, but the blind spot is you don't know, but they know. It's kind of like having a poppy seed stuck between your teeth, you know? And I know that now all of you are rubbing your teeth. You got a poppy seed stuck between your teeth. And wouldn't it be nice if somebody told you about that poppy seed before you went home at the end of the day? They told you in the morning after you had that poppy seed bagel. And so feedback allows you to have that blind spot now be something in the open area. And that taps into the creative unknown, so that when you do team building activities and you do feedback, it taps into what we wouldn't even know that's possible. And so by building relationships, helping us understand that open area, as well as giving some feedback, you can really be very, very powerful and tap into that creative unknown, which allows you to explore new possibilities, which helps get better results. So building activities are great. Make sure that they're related to what it is that you're trying to do. I just am not a big fan of team building activities that are not related to anything, and you just kind of go, now why are we doing that? Here's the second drawing. Is I have a book called Team Energizers, and it's got 50 practical team activities, and I'm looking at the list, and I'm pulling out one. And Cassandra Brune, you work at SVN, I have no idea what that is. So Cassandra Brune, you just won a copy of my book, Team Energizers, 50 Practical Team Activities. So congratulations. And there are some hints for giving and receiving helpful feedback. I could spend a lot of time on that one, but when you're giving feedback, just make sure that it's timely, and ask if it's okay. You know, the only way that we get better is by giving feedback to each other and being willing to listen to it. As a team, here's my last and final point, is that as a team, one of the things that I highly recommend that you do is you create a space for that feedback as a team. So periodically, critique yourselves. Talk about what's going well. What do we like about being on this team from a results, process, and relationships point of view? And that what could we do differently? Now notice, this isn't a negative sign, like what could we do, what are we doing that's bad? This is more of upgrade language. What could we be doing differently? How could we do it differently? So that there's an implication of let's do it better next time. So you reinforce the things that are working well, and the do differently is you do differently the next time, because your team has a short-term, medium-term, and a long-term perspective. They're working through that team map. And so, you know, you don't have to do this every single time, but periodically you do want to make sure that you pause and reflect so that you can improve. So that is the team trifecta. Focusing on getting the results, using a smooth process, recognizing that conflict is a normal and natural part of that process, and not freaking out too bad, and as well as keeping cooperative relationships. So I am going to stop and look at comments here. Okay. Let's see, Catherine. Catherine has a question about, oh, thank you, Catherine. Great job, she says. Love the workout session. How much time do you typically allocate? A half day? You know, GE's pretty pathologic about the process that you use for that kind of thing, Catherine, but you can always modify. But the typical workout process actually has a lot of pre-work done in the planning piece, and then the workout itself is usually about a day, day and a half. And then you've got the execution phase. So there's a great book, I think it's called the GE Workout, and I will put that up on the slides for you. Okay. So I have another question here on relationship. Can a toxic team ever recover? And this is from Joan. You know, that's a great question, Joan. Usually when somebody asks that, they've either been exposed to a toxic team or they are currently on a toxic team. Toxic teams don't just get to be toxic. They were exposed. They went on some kind of stage of team development and they are stuck, usually in the conflict area, the storming. They might actually be stuck in the forming, so you're getting some weird behavior because nobody's accepting. You have to really look at what's driving people's behavior. Is it that they don't trust people, they don't accept people, or maybe they're even stuck in the norming phase where they're not agreeing on how they're going to cooperate. And so my experience of this is it depends on how long they've been stuck and what their degree of interest is in changing. Sometimes, I think there's always hope, but sometimes I think people don't want to do the work. And so sometimes it's just a better idea to disband the team or get some new blood in. But the team has what's the word I'm looking for? Descended into that state. So the question is does the group have the stomach to make it better? Does the leadership, does the management have the will to invest time? Because that is going to take some time and an intervention, and I would highly recommend that you get a professional, especially if your team is highly toxic. So thanks for that question, Joan. And if you have any questions about that, you can give me a holler on that one too. So we are coming up on the end of our broadcast, getting pretty close. I just wanted to let you know that this is kind of what we do. We do customized programs around teams. So that was a great lead-in, Joan. I really appreciate it. We do a lot of facilitation around teams, and appreciate you being online. Our next webinar is the 10 common mistakes panelists make and how to avoid them. It's December 11th. Hope to see you there. We are going to have a link to a replay of this, and as well as the handout. So on that happy note, I think we're done. Thanks a lot for attending. Thanks.